and welcome to the 13th window in the TooFatLardies 2021 Advent Calendar. It may be the 13th, but it's not an unlucky number because we're fortunate to have Sidney here today to talk to us how his game design ideas have been influenced by the reading of personal memoirs of people who fought.
I've always really enjoyed the concept in Lardies' rules of the big man as one of the forces behind battlefield cohesion and military success, driving forward their forces against the opposing enemy. It's a concept that I always feel resonates with my understanding of how big men, junior officers perform on a battlefield. But it was really only when I was building forces for the Western Front of the Great War about 10 years ago, and I started reading fairly widely through the literature available, that I found out more detail about the officers in the Great War, about their human stories, about the social aspects of the classes from which junior officers emerged from, and also the officer group as a tactical dynamic in battle itself. One of the books which for me became a favourite was entitled 6 Weeks, The Short and Gallant Life of the British Officer in the First World War by John Lewis Stemple. It's a detailed, compelling and fascinating account of the Great War from the perspective of British junior officers, the first and second lieutenants and captains on the Western Front. I found lots of books focusing on the lives of private soldiers in the Great War, but I didn't find so many stories which were from the officer's perspective and also covered different aspects of the war, including their social class and the relationship of the officers as a group with the men under their command. And 6 Weeks is a book which is really rich with period details. Some of those are from a world which has kind of passed us by, the world of personal servants and utterly rigorous class divisions. Other period details were set out in the book in a very personal manner, including the letters written by the officers to their wives and their children. And there were first-hand quotations from a wide variety of sources, including letters and diaries. I thought it was a really excellent read, and I'd recommend it to anyone interested in the Great War. But the things that I took away also then went on to form the basis of 2 articles which I put in the Lard magazines, which I reproduced on my blog, with Richard's kind permission, I should add. I called the British and German one Just the Right Sort of Chap, British and German big men in through the mud and the blood. And the French version was Les Grands Hommes, French big men in through the mud and the blood. And what I tried to take away from the inspiration in the book was that there wasn't just one type of officer who was present in the Great War. Why indeed would there be? But there were different characteristics which I found quite surprising, which came out of 6 Weeks. So, for example, many of the junior officers were just so incredibly young. They could be as young as 17 years old, almost coming immediately from school, rising to 18 and a half years old in 1915. I thought that was something always to remember when we were using the big men on the table. Also, the depths of loyalty, duty, respect and devotion of the junior officers to their men in many circumstances, which seems to have been reciprocated in many cases by the other ranks, led officers to quite remarkable feats of courage, bravery and self-sacrifice. And that courage was contagious. There was lots of examples in the book of soldiers following their officers for many reasons, but the inspiration of the courage and daring showed by the officers was one of the paramount factors. But despite all this, the other thing which came through the book was that the distinction between gentlemen officers, generally from public schools, and temporary gentlemen from lower, middle or working class backgrounds was preserved. Perhaps that's a 21st century preoccupation that many of us notice now, but I did feel that there was some real mileage to be gained from that in the context of a war game. So I used the book by John Lewis Stemple to create these articles, which I placed on the blog, which were in the Lard magazines, really to give backgrounds in respect of the officers and the NCOs, both on the British and German side and then later on the French side, to really enhance the experience of the players around the table when we were playing games on the Western Front in the First World War. So we focused on trying to allocate different approaches for the big men. They would have to roll on what we called their breeding to determine their background and the part of society that they came from. They would have additional character traits which could have an impact on the games themselves. We rolled up their physical stature to see how well they would endure the rigours of the trenches. And we gave attention to their popularity. Would they be somebody who their troops would attempt to rescue them if they were wounded in no man's land? Or were they, alternatively, rather a cold fish that would never really win the trust of their troops? There were other rules that we added as well, partly relating to the health of the big men, and also shell shock, a quite controversial and difficult set of rules that we devised to try and reflect, certainly when we were looking at the French troops in Through the Mud and the Blood, which was based on the book Under Fire by Henri Barbusse, a very famous French novel about World War I, which was particularly harrowing. I remember that we devised rules about La Cafard, the cockroach, the crisis of black melancholy, and we sort of had rules in respect of officers which were susceptible over a campaign to shell shock. That didn't really work, but all of these were ways in which we were trying to add more depth to our big men, inspired by 6 weeks, which gave a really good overview. And one of the things which I enjoyed most was that we created a set of tables which we called After the Guns Fell Silent, which dealt with what happened to your big man after the game, really after the war. You know, what were the consequences for that particular character? Did they survive to the 11th of November? And if they did they stay in the military, or did they pursue a civilian career? And what happened as regards their exit into civilian life or military life? We had a lot of fun creating those various different possibilities which extended for those officers after the end of the game. And all of that was really brought about by the inspiration and the genesis of 6 weeks, which really brought to life the aspects of tactical dynamics and also the very human story of junior officers in the Great War.